Take a deep breath and clear your mind of what you think obsession looks like. Curious. When most people think of an obsessed ex, they picture late-night calls, frantic text messages, standing outside your window in the rain, or dramatic outbursts. But high-level toxic personalities, specifically clinical narcissists, do not operate like standard emotional human beings. They operate like intelligence operators. When a narcissist becomes dangerously fixated on you after a split, they don't plead, they monitor, they don't beg, they calculate. Right now, you might think they've forgotten you. You see them posting online, living their life, acting completely unfazed, maybe even parade a new partner in front of the world. You tell yourself, they moved on. Sighs. But from a behavioral profiling perspective, that precise display of indifference is often the ultimate camouflage. Beneath that calm, unbothered exterior, a covert engine of psychological surveillance is running at full capacity. In this breakdown, we are stripping away the emotional drama and looking strictly at the human nervous system, nonverbal indicators, and tactical behavioral loops. I am going to reveal the exact, subtle behavioral anomaly that proves, without a shadow of a doubt, that a narcissist is still deeply, dangerously obsessed with you. Pay close attention, because if you miss the specific signal we are covering in the final segment, you will misread their silence as safety. And in the game of psychological control, misreading silence is the exact mistake that allows them back into your head. Stay with me through every single indicator, because understanding these mechanics isn't just about curiosity, it is your primary defense shield. Let's establish a fundamental rule of human behavioral profiling. Behavior is language, and the autonomic nervous system cannot lie. When a normal relationship ends, human beings experience a decay curve of emotional attachment. Grief settles in, processing occurs, and focus gradually shifts inward. But a narcissist does not register relationships through attachment. They register them through ownership. To a narcissist, you are not an ex-partner who walked away. You are a piece of personal property that has breached containment. Because their ego cannot process the loss of control, their brain enters a state of hypervigilant covert monitoring. They will tell the world you meant nothing. They will act completely indifferent. But if you know how to read the underlying metrics, the micro-gestures, the linguistic shifts, and the tactical timing, their posture collapses instantly. When you run into a narcissist who claims to have completely moved past you, ignore their spoken script entirely. Watch their physiology. When an obsessed narcissist encounters your presence or hears your name mentioned unexpectedly in a group setting, 3 unconscious physiological markers occur within the first 300 milliseconds. The microflash of contempt. Watch for a brief, asymmetrical lifting of one corner of the lip. This isn't anger. It's a leakage of secret superiority and covert obsession. They believe they still hold psychological leverage over you. Blink rate deceleration. When a human being is passively disinterested, their blink rate remains steady, roughly 15 to 20 blinks per minute. When an obsessed narcissist locks onto a target they are actively analyzing, their blink rate drops dramatically. They enter an intense visual intake mode, assessing your appearance, posture, and energy to see if you are suffering without them. Pupillary dilation and spatial orienting. Even if their torso is turned away from you, observe their feet and leading shoulder. The body subconsciously aligns toward the primary focus of interest. If their feet point directly at you while their face pretends you don't exist, their nervous system is hyper-focused on your position. An obsessed narcissist rarely exposes themselves directly until they know your defenses are down. Instead, they deploy third-party intelligence networks, often called flying monkeys. Pay close attention if mutual acquaintances, distant friends, or family members suddenly start asking hyper-specific questions about your life. Are you seeing anyone new? How are you handling the breakup? Do you miss the old routine? Notice the structure of those questions. They are not asking how you are doing out of genuine care. They are gathering vulnerability metrics. An obsessed narcissist feeds on data. They need to know if your emotional baseline has dropped or if you have built strong boundaries. Furthermore, observe their digital footprint. Sudden dramatic pivots in their social media post timing, specifically aligned with your active hours, or deliberate accidental views on your public content, are engineered breadcrumbs designed to keep a thread of attention connected between your brain and theirs. As time passes, an obsessed narcissist will attempt to test the tension of the leash. They don't do this with an apology. They do it with an engineered pretext. They will suddenly text you about an item left at your house 3 years ago. They will accidentally send a text meant for someone else to your number. They will create a manufactured crisis that subtly implies only you have the key or knowledge to solve it. This is a classic behavioral probe. In tactical psychology, this is called a low-risk baseline test. They toss a light stimulus into your environment to measure two things: speed of response, how quickly do you reply? Emotional tone, are you defensive, angry, or polite? Here is the truth. Anger is not boundary enforcement. Anger is proof of emotional engagement. If you respond with rage or long explanations, the narcissist registers that as a massive win. To an obsessed narcissist, negative attention is still high-octane fuel. It tells them the channel is still open. Now, let's talk about the absolute definitive sign that proves a narcissist is still completely obsessed with your existence. This happens when you exhibit complete emotional indifference, what behavioral profilers call the zero response state. When you completely cut off their emotional fuel, an obsessed narcissist will undergo a psychological phenomenon known as an extinction burst. They will execute an unprovoked reaction test. They will intentionally post something, say something to a mutual contact, or perform an action specifically targeted at your deepest personal insecurity or core value system. It will be so surgical, so precisely tailored to spark a reaction from you that it could not possibly be a coincidence. If a narcissist goes out of their way to build a public or private display explicitly designed to get any rise out of you, whether it's attempting to make you jealous, smearing your reputation, or mimicking your new hobbies, that is the ultimate sign of total consuming obsession. It proves that every action they take is still secretly referenced against your existence. You are still the central anchor of their mental world, driving their decisions from behind the scenes. When you recognize this, do not engage, do not correct the record, do not react. Recognize it for what it is: a desperate attempt by a compromised ego to regain control over a target that has successfully evolved beyond their reach. When a normal, healthy relationship comes to an end, the human mind undergoes a natural emotional decay process. Sadness, reflection, and processing gradually give way to detachment, allowing both individuals to slowly recalibrate their focus back toward their own independent lives. But when dealing with a high-level toxic personality, specifically a clinical narcissist, this natural emotional trajectory simply does not exist. A narcissist does not process human relationships through the lens of emotional attachment, mutual respect, or shared history. They view all human interactions strictly through the framework of ownership and control. To a narcissist, you were never an independent partner who decided to walk away or someone with whom things simply didn't work out. In their internal psychological construct, you are a piece of personal property that has breached containment and broken free from their sphere of influence. Because their fragile ego cannot tolerate the reality of losing control over a target, their brain instinctively shifts from active, overt dominance to covert, strategic surveillance. This transition is where most people get completely misled. When a narcissist suddenly goes quiet, stops reaching out, or adopts a posture of cold, unbothered detachment, the natural assumption is that they have moved on and erased you from their mind. You might see them posting online, living their life, or immediately parading a new relationship in front of the world, making it look as though you never mattered to them at all. But from a behavioral profiling standpoint, that exact public display of indifference is very often an elaborate psychological camouflage. Beneath that calm, stoic exterior, a narcissist's mind is actively running a covert engine of hyper-vigilant monitoring. They have not moved on emotionally, they have merely pivoted their tactics. They move from direct engagement to silent intelligence gathering, carefully tracking your whereabouts, monitoring your social circle, and constantly assessing whether you are thriving or struggling without them. They need to know if you are suffering, if you are missing them, or if you have built strong emotional defenses that make you unreachable. They monitor your digital footprints, analyze your social media posting times, and subtly probe mutual acquaintances to gather data on your current psychological state. This silent fixation stems from a profound psychological necessity. A narcissist requires continuous validation of their own importance. The idea that you could be happy, successful, or entirely indifferent without their presence in your life threatens the core illusion of their superiority. Therefore, as long as they believe there is even a fraction of a chance to regain control or extract a reaction from you, their subconscious fixation remains fully active. They hold on to the memory of you not out of love or nostalgia, but because your independence represents an open dynamic of lost dominance that their ego desperately craves to resolve. Understanding this underlying reality changes how you interpret their silence completely, shifting your perspective from viewing them as someone who easily forgot you to recognizing them as an observer who is quietly waiting for the exact right moment to reassert control over your life. To truly understand whether a narcissist is still fixated on you, you must bypass their spoken words entirely and focus exclusively on the raw, unscripted responses of their autonomic nervous system. Human beings can easily memorize scripts, rehearse cold indifference, and feign total detachment, but the underlying nervous system cannot lie. When you cross paths with a narcissist who claims to have completely forgotten your existence, or when your name is unexpectedly dropped into a conversation in their presence, their immediate subconscious physiology will leak the truth long before their deliberate conscious mind can filter it. The first physiological metric to observe is the microflash of contempt, an involuntary facial gesture that occurs within the first 300 milliseconds of exposure to a target or trigger. This micro-expression manifests as a brief, subtle, asymmetrical pulling upward of one corner of the mouth or a slight tightening around the eyes. It is not an expression of explosive rage or overt annoyance. Rather, it is a fleeting leakage of hidden superiority and covert ownership. In that split second, their brain registers your presence or mention not with genuine indifference, but with an internal surge of calculation, silently evaluating whether they still maintain psychological leverage over your emotional state. The second critical physiological metric involves tracking their eye movement dynamics, specifically their blink rate deceleration and gaze fixation. In standard, relaxed human interactions where no intense interest or perceived threat is present, a person's baseline blink rate sits comfortably between 15 to 20 blinks per minute. However, when an obsessed narcissist suddenly locks onto a target they are actively analyzing, their baseline blink rate drops dramatically, sometimes slowing down to near immobility. Their eyes enter an aggressive visual intake mode, absorbing every micro detail of your appearance, your posture, your clothing, and your surrounding social dynamic. They are actively assessing whether you look confident, broken, stressed, or rejuvenated, gathering real-time visual data to determine if your life has deteriorated or improved since their departure. Alongside blink rate shifts, observe the mechanics of spatial orienting and subconscious alignment. Human body language naturally rotates toward the primary point of interest or focus within an environment, regardless of where the head or eyes are deliberately pointed. A narcissist may consciously turn their head away from you, engage in loud conversation with someone else, or intentionally look at their phone to convey complete disinterest. Yet, if you look down at their lower body, their feet, leading shoulder, and hips will almost always remain oriented directly toward your physical coordinates. This subtle bodily tension proves that their peripheral awareness and subconscious orientation are completely consumed by your presence, forcing their body to stay locked onto you as the primary anchor in the room, while their face desperately plays the role of a stranger who couldn't care less. When a narcissist shifts into a phase of covert obsession, they quickly realize that direct contact carries a high risk of rejection or exposure. To bypass this risk, they pivot toward intelligence operations, relying heavily on third-party networks and proxy channels to maintain a constant flow of information about your life. In psychological profiling, these intermediary figures are often referred to as surrogates or flying monkeys. These individuals are usually mutual acquaintances, distant friends, or family members who have been systematically manipulated into acting as information gatherers without even realizing they are being used as tactical instruments. When an obsessed narcissist utilizes a proxy network, you will notice a sudden, subtle shift in how these mutual contacts interact with you. Out of nowhere, people you haven't spoken to in months will reach out under the guise of casual catch-ups or friendly concern. During these interactions, pay close attention to the structural framework of their questions. Genuine friends ask open-ended questions focused on your overall well-being, but surrogates deploy hyper-specific probes designed to test your emotional baseline. They will ask precisely tailored questions about whether you are seeing anyone new, how you are handling the breakup, if you seem stressed, or if you ever bring up your ex in conversation. Every piece of data you give them is immediately funneled back to the narcissist, who uses it to map out your current psychological landscape and measure whether your emotional defenses are dropping. Alongside human proxies, an obsessed narcissist heavily leverages digital channels to monitor your movements and maintain a subtle psychological thread of connection. Because they cannot bear the thought of being completely erased from your mind, they intentionally construct digital footprints meant to cross your radar. This often manifests as sudden, dramatic changes in their online behavior that directly correlate with your personal routines. You might notice them posting content at the exact hours you are typically active, sharing locations or topics that hold specific shared significance between the two of them and you, or viewing your public stories within seconds of upload. Sometimes they will go as far as creating fresh, anonymous accounts, or resetting old profile themes to project a curated image of profound transformation or thriving success. These digital footprints and proxy inquiries are not random, innocent behaviors. They are calculated probes designed to achieve two distinct goals. First, they allow the narcissist to continuously audit your life without having to risk direct contact or suffer the embarrassment of a clear boundary enforcement. Second, they act as intentional psychological breadcrumbs dropped into your field of awareness. By ensuring their name, mutual connections, or online presence keep surfacing in your daily environment, they disrupt your moving on process and force your brain to keep processing thoughts of them. They remain fixated on gathering enough intelligence until they locate a specific vulnerability, waiting for the right entry point where a direct maneuver can successfully breach your personal space once again. As time passes and the narcissist's silent monitoring fails to produce the desired emotional surrender from you, their internal panic escalates, driving them to step out of the shadows and initiate a direct maneuver known as tactical hoovering. This behavior is not motivated by genuine remorse, sudden clarity, or a heartfelt desire to reconcile. It is a calculated, low-risk test engineered specifically to measure the structural integrity of your boundaries, because exposing themselves to explicit rejection would shatter their fragile sense of superiority. An obsessed narcissist will almost never reach out with a direct, vulnerable confession. Instead, they construct an elaborate, plausible pretext, a false emergency, a mundane administrative query, or a seemingly innocent mistake designed to force a response out of you without forcing them to take accountability. You might receive a sudden message asking about an obscure piece of property left at your home years ago, a request for a password to a shared account you thought was long closed, or a text claiming they accidentally sent a message intended for someone else to your number. In more aggressive scenarios, they might stage a sudden personal crisis or dramatic life event, dropping the information through a mutual contact or direct message in the hopes that your natural empathy will compel you to break silence. Every single one of these interactions is a controlled psychological probe, what behavioral profilers classify as a low-risk baseline test. By throwing a carefully calibrated stimulus into your personal space, they are attempting to gather two vital pieces of intelligence: your speed of response and your emotional tone. When you respond, regardless of what you actually say, the narcissist immediately analyzes how quickly you broke silence. A rapid reply tells them that your attention is still tethered to them, sitting in anticipation of their eventual contact. Furthermore, they evaluate the emotional charge behind your words. If you respond with heated anger, long paragraphs of frustration, or defensive accusations, you might assume you are standing up for yourself and setting a firm boundary. But from a narcissistic perspective, anger is not a boundary at all. To an obsessed narcissist, any form of high-octane emotional energy, whether positive or negative, serves as immediate validation, proving that they still possess the power to disrupt your internal equilibrium and dictate your mood. The ultimate purpose of tactical hoovering is to establish a bridgehead back into your life, finding the precise crack in your armor where they can re-anchor their influence. If they detect even a sliver of polite obligation, guilt, or residual anger in your reaction, they register the baseline test as a complete success. It informs them that the leash is still intact and that your emotional defenses can be bypassed with the right combination of persistent pressure and calculated drama. They remain deeply fixated on generating these artificial points of friction because any interaction, no matter how chaotic or brief, reassures their ego that you have not truly escaped their psychological reach. The absolute most definitive behavioral metric that confirms a narcissist remains completely and dangerously obsessed with your existence occurs only when you have successfully reached what profilers refer to as the zero response state. This state is achieved when you have completely removed all emotional fuel from the dynamic, projecting total emotional indifference, ignoring their proxy networks, and refusing to engage with their low-risk baseline tests. When a high-level toxic personality is starved of all environmental feedback, their internal psychological structure begins to rapidly destabilize. Because their fragile ego cannot process the reality of becoming utterly irrelevant to a target they once actively controlled, their nervous system perceives this total, unbothered silence not as a healthy boundary, but as a critical, existential threat to their dominance. In response to this profound deficit of attention and total loss of leverage, the narcissist will predictably execute a psychological mechanism known as an extinction burst, which manifests externally as a highly calculated, unprovoked reaction test. Unlike the subtle intelligence gathering executed through their proxies or the plausible deniability of a casual hoovering attempt, the unprovoked reaction test is a highly aggressive surgical strike aimed directly at your most vulnerable emotional anchors. They will intentionally manufacture a scenario, make a highly visible public statement, or perform a specific action that is explicitly reverse-engineered to trigger your deepest personal insecurities or violate your fundamental core value system. To the outside observer or a casual mutual acquaintance, this action might appear entirely random, completely innocent, or merely coincidental, but to you, it will land with the terrifying precision of a psychological sniper shot. They might suddenly adopt and publicly flaunt the highly specific niche hobby you spent years trying to get them to participate in. Or they might visibly align themselves with individuals they know caused you profound emotional trauma in the past. They will take the intimate data they collected during the relationship, your private fears, your unspoken aspirations, and your hidden trauma triggers, and deliberately weaponize it to construct a stimulus so intensely provocative that your natural human instinct will scream at you to react, defend your character, or furiously correct the public record. This calculated escalation is the ultimate, undeniable proof of an ongoing, consuming obsession because it demonstrates that every significant move they make in their own life is still secretly calibrated against your continued existence. They are not acting out of a genuine desire to improve their own lives, nor are they organically moving forward into a new chapter. They are burning massive, unsustainable amounts of cognitive energy solely to design an environmental trap tailored perfectly to your specific psychological profile. The entire elaborate theater of their behavior is built entirely for an audience of one, desperately attempting to shock your autonomic nervous system into breaking its silence and re-engaging. By deploying this targeted behavioral strike, they are effectively sending a high-frequency psychological sonar ping into your environment, waiting with intense anticipation to see if your emotional state will echo back to them. They need to know that they still possess the architectural authority to disrupt your peace, alter your baseline heart rate, and force you into a defensive posture. Instead of detaching and self-regulating, they remain entirely dependent on manufacturing artificial chaos within your periphery, measuring their own internal stability